A very good evening and welcome to this special broadcast on Moneycontrol Live with me, Stacey Pereira. Now, just last week, Dipali Sharma, a Twitter user, posted a question on Twitter where she asked simply, is a 40 lakh per annum salary good enough for a 23-year-old in India? While the responses were quite wide and ranging, it definitely put that genuine question in a person's mind saying, what really would be that ideal salary? Now, since the tweet was shared, it has got over 1.1 million views, I beg your pardon, and over 1,000 likes. And Twitterati had quite a different way of responding. While there were sarcastic ones that outrightly said, no, 40 lakhs per annum is just not enough. There were others that said a 23-year-old should perhaps be a founder for a startup, or else they should, they've failed in life. Now, those were quite a wide-ranging sort of responses that it did get. Others from cities like Bengaluru said even 1 crore is not good enough for living in a city like Bengaluru. So this definitely sparked that question in our mind, saying what would be that ideal salary for a fresher, and what are the criteria that one should really be looking into, or what is, how is this figure really derived at? Now, of course, cost of living is a big criteria. I mean, it varies for different cities across the state. Also, your qualification and the background that you're coming in, that too will play a big role. But let's break this down to understand what should you be really looking out for. Let me bring in my guests who will share their 2 cents. I have Sandeep Bidani, the ex-CHRO at IBM, Amex, and also KPMG, a culture change consultant and also an executive coach for CXOs at Global B School programs. We have Sanchita Mukherjee, a senior finance professional, also the managing partner at Talk the Walk. And also joining me on this broadcast is Shreya Kapoor, a finance content creator. And it's very interesting to bring someone like this on board because they're seeing how things have been changing when it comes to careers and salaries as such. So let me first go across to Sandeep and get from the traditional point of view, from an employer's perspective, when they get into something like this, what really helps them determine that fresher salary band, or at least that range? What are they looking at when they're putting out that number?
Great and very interesting times. Twitter is getting even more active, and a lot of conversation that's happening. Very interesting comments as I was going through some of the inputs that people were sharing. But how traditionally organizations tend to look at skills and putting a value to skills is really a question of demand and supply. And if you start looking at the tech sector, or you look at certain other sectors, which is content, analytics, AI, a lot of these emerging, you will find it's very, very fragmented. But there are patterns. For example, generic technology skills would attract a salary range of maybe 4.5 lakhs per annum to maybe 6 lakhs because there is bulk hiring. If you're looking at very niche skills, companies tend to put a premium to that. So it all boils down to what kind of skilling are you investing in as a fresher. The other sector then, other sectors that you start going into, which is really new age sectors that are coming in, edtech, fintech, and various others. The more the specialization, the more the premiums. And we've seen compensations range from anything between 11 lakhs to 17 lakhs per annum as well for freshers. And I think the third element is this whole definition of freshers or a 23-year-old. The 23-year-old could also be a fresher out of a B school because that's not been mentioned in the tweet. And if that 23-year-old is emerging out of a B school, the compensations could be higher. I mean, they could be starting even at a 25 lakhs onwards. So you look at the larger scaled organizations, those are the kind of setups that they look at. But essentially, it boils down to demand and supply and the specialization that is available.
Right. Sanchita, according to you, what factors would really determine whether your salary is good enough to have a comfortable standard of living? Like, what are we going to segregate, whatever that X number be, but what really would then categorize it as a comfortable standard of living?
Right. So, for example, when I'm an ex-banker. So when I was working in a large bank, we would often get opportunities across locations, domestic and international, one thing ideally which a fresher or anyways a professional should keep in mind would be the purchasing power parity of your country. Sounds very technical, but it isn't so. It's essentially, for example, if I was to look at the country as an individual, so the GDP nominally would be ranked at as fifth in the world order, but in purchasing power parity, India in today's date is third. What do you mean by that? It means that you're earning in INR, however, the cost of living is much lower than in developed markets, so you land up saving more. So your earning slightly increases or tweaks on the higher side because you're better off in the purchasing power parity. Rather, if you were living in, say, Hong Kong or London or California, you would actually be shelling out way more than what you actually even earn in dollars. So you are actually not better off. You will land up probably saving lesser. So that is known as purchasing power of parity. In fact, if you look at UK nowadays, they're going through a cost of living crisis because of the inflation. So similarly, in India, when you're looking at determinants, please let's understand the industry that you're in, the kind of job and the work experience that you're bringing to the table. Accordingly, you decide on your salary and you see what are your objectives in terms of where you want to be in the next 5 years, which city, what are your dreams? Would you like to own a house or a car? Are you saving for further education? Accordingly, these will be determinants in going for a salary hike or asking your prospective employers that this is the range I should be. By the way, to quote certain studies which was done in 2022, the average salary across industries, say be it IT, you can be a nurse, you can be social service worker, all of that. The average salary in India is close to 5.7 lakhs per annum, which is actually 47,500 a month.
Right. Okay, so it definitely varied across cities, across the board. Those are criteria that one must keep in mind. But let me also bring in Shreya Kapoor now to get a sense of, in the times that we're living in, people say that, you have to have at least a thought of having a multiple sources of income. Now, that is not how the traditional way would be, if I had to say. And so if you're looking at 40 lakhs per annum, that is not something that one would think by getting one job. Now, is it become like an imperative that you would have to see alternative sources of income?
So what I've seen as a trend, and being a management consultant myself in the past, something I've seen is that if you're a fresher, you don't really have a lot of on-the-job skills that are required. And that's something that you acquire when you're on the job. So whatever is needed to be a good employee is unfortunately not taught as much, even in the top tier colleges, where it's mostly theoretical. Of course, I'm not generalizing it, but so and so, like mostly what you learn is theoretical and not something that you'd require on the job. So when you're a fresher, you pretty much for the first 6 months, you're just a liability to the organization and you're still learning things that you will eventually need to be employable. That being said, I think during that duration, thinking about having multiple sources of income is not something that is very pragmatic because you're still learning the skills that you need for your actual job. And also bringing in the point around moonlighting, right? Even if you want to have another job, a lot of organizations have rule against that. You can't even be a freelancer, especially if it's in the same industry. And unfortunately, because the skills sort of collide there, having multiple sources of income then becomes difficult. But a very imperative source of income that a lot of people from our generation are thinking about is passive sources of income from, say, investing. So I think when it comes to your salary, you should have enough discretionary spending left, that even after your rent and utilities are done for and are accounted for, you can still account for, say, for example, an emergency fund and account for, say, for example, investing in index funds or mutual funds, so that even if tomorrow, God forbid, you are out of a job, which is what is the trend that we've seen in the past couple of months, especially in the tech industry, you still have an emergency fund you can rely back on, even if you don't have an active salary coming in. And you also have some sort of passive income coming in form of your dividends from investments, so on and so forth.
Well, right. So, Sandeep, is it okay then to generalize a salary figure? Now, would that change from person to person depending on the socio background? What really are companies or startups supposed to be looking at in terms of this?
Absolutely, great point. And I think two very important points came out in the earlier conversations. One, the purchasing power parity. And I think the HR guys got very smart over a period because as they started moving people across different regions, they started paying market parity salaries, because they said you're in that market, you'll earn there and spend there. So whatever little play that existed in the cash flows sort of went away because they started comparing local market salaries. So a lot of organizations brought in that element. That's an important one. The other point that you're absolutely bringing in right is how do you get a passive income? And when you're just coming on board, I think what skills you're acquiring will start defining what salaries you will get if you acquired them before coming in. Now, you would realize a lot of youngsters today are pre-skilling them before they walk in. So while they are going through their engineering programs, or they are going through their creative programs like Masscom and other, they are doing digital marketing programs. They're learning how to make content. They're going in. So they're really skilling themselves up before coming in, because there is a sharp difference between what is generic skill and what is special skill. And a lot of them are at least acquiring the certifications, if not the practice. That does give them an upper edge. So it may not be prudent to generalize. In fact, so much so, if you come down to some good, I will say, top colleges in Delhi University, even when consulting firms go there, they made offers of as high as 20 to 25 lakhs just to graduates in Delhi University. Now, that may be like a top 2%, but it is a top 2%, so you can be there. The question is, what's the differentiator that these top 2% carry? And how can you bring that on board? So that's becoming a very important mindset. The other is this whole element of passive income. Organizations have debated it. The gig economy has been debated repeatedly, but organizations have also found ways around it. So in the creative kind of space, where let's say it's content creation, design, a lot of that, there are organizations that are taking on youngsters as consultants so that they have the flexibility of letting go and all of that. And these individuals have flexibility to do more. So they at times get 3 days a week, 4 days a week. So that is here to stay. While they debate how do they create gig projects within the organization, because eventually it's all about skilling and growing. And that's really becoming the norm.
Right. Sanchita, would you agree then there is a demand-supply mismatch of sorts? Like, we pride ourselves with having the greatest demographic dividend, but we've seen this happen in the past. We've seen techies, where like there's a talent war up there, and startups are trying to lure talent by giving them, crazy joining bonuses, vacations in Dubai. And then you have a downside where there is a markdown in the market, and so everything's all hushed away. How is one supposed to navigate that whole cycle, especially if you're just joining the job market?
That's a beautiful question, and one can only navigate that if you're very flexible and adaptable as an individual. I think for today's youngsters, the two biggest qualities would actually be to be very, very adaptive, to be very well read into terms of what is happening in the world over. If one were to actually deep dive, if I were a fresher, and one would actually to analyze what has exactly happened since the Lehman Brothers crash, would be that the US has gone on an unfettered money printing mechanism. So there was so much of dollar liquidity splashing around globally in Silicon Valley. And then, of course, after Silicon Valley, the PVC flush with funds would be investing in startups in India. It's actually all of this dollar liquidity, which was printed by US fiat money that we call in finance parlance, which was actually being raked in by private equity VC and then funded. And hence startups were spending with both hands in terms of the salary, the kind of freshers they were recruiting. The salaries were like top notch in the last 5 years. But now that US has gone in a quantitative tightening, the dollar has been sucked out of the system and salaries are being cut because startups have to now survive just on the basis of their business models, right? On the growth models, and they cannot do the cash burn that they were previously doing because of the PEVC funding. So if you're a fresher and you're aware of this situation, it's an economic cycle that the world is going through these policies, then what you would do is you would be very adaptive. You will upskill yourself. We had this conversation a few minutes back and figure out ways and means in which you can keep yourself afloat, just like a startup founder, such that you're relevant and you're highly employable in a situation when the world is actually taking the dollar liquidity off the table.
Right. Sanchita, you gave us that view, but let me go back to Shreya and ask her. She spoke about passive incomes. Now we're looking at, we are in a time, you can say, where people are getting paid per post, be it on social media or, having those opportunities which will not perhaps be the traditional kind. Are those more luring and will they have a longer term? And I'm asking Shreya this because she has seen herself as a content creator. Is that, are these alternatives now becoming more mainstream?
Definitely. I think I started content creation almost 2 years back, and ever since then, there's been a huge influx of specifically finance content creators. But I think there is definitely a problem that they're solving for, which is why they're able to demand that premium, which is the problem of distribution. I think one of the biggest costs that a startup sort of has to inculcate is that of distribution, right? How to acquire new customers. And that's the problem that influencers are solving for, be it whatever niche. I think that's why they're able to demand the price, as you mentioned, like per post or per video content that they're putting out, because they're solving for specific kind of audience that startup requires. And not just startups, we've been approached by even the government of India to kind of spread around messaging that they're coming around specifically in the finance space. So I think definitely there's been a huge influx of influencers across the table, be it whatever niche, because this is becoming lucrative. But on the other side, I think the audience is also very easily able to figure out who's the actual content creator and who's just there to make a quick buck. And I think with the SEBI guidelines coming into space specifically for finance creators, I think while it is extremely lucrative, people with the restrictions will also become more accountable for the actions that they're putting across on social media.
Right. I guess I have to end this chat by asking each one of you what, according to you, would be that ideal salary if you were a fresher getting out in the market. What would be that number and why? Because that is more important on where you're going to be using that or how it is going to be used. So let's get each one. Maybe Sanchita can start. What would be that figure for you and why?
Again, it would very specifically come into the industry you're in, the job type that you're doing, and the location, keeping in mind the purchasing power parity and the inflation. So no specific number, but since I'm aware that there was a survey done and anything over 5.7 is, that's the average. And if you want to be in the median of the average, then at least within financial services, what I've noticed in the last 20 years, 2 decades of my working over here, that for a fresher, something like a 10 lakh plus is something usually what people come in. After that, there's of course a raise which happens every year, keeping in mind, again, all of these types in terms of job type, location, the kind of work that you're doing, the value that you bring to the table, all of that.
Right. Well, we have inflation numbers that are going to be out just this evening, and that is also something that we've not seen really percolate in our salaries, if you have to say so. Maybe for the freshers, that's a good way of really bargaining. Would you think that, Sandeep?
And, you just got to keep sizing the market to understand what is the skill that's in demand and map the specific industry that you are actually trying to work to. That's a very important thing because the same skills are very portable across industries. And that's the key. If you understand that a particular sector requires this skill more, you can actually demand more. And that's the advantage that you have with youngsters because you can research and research has become so much easier. So if I were to look at the kind of salary ranges, anything between 4.5 lakhs to about 7.5 lakhs for generic roles. Specialist roles are between 11 to 17. That's how it's going. And if you again go into, let's say, consulting kind of organizations that are picking up from top tier colleges, that could go even up to 20 lakhs. But that's a very, very small population.
Okay, well, we do have a couple of queries that are coming in from our viewers. Bruno Fadnavis is saying 12 lakhs is good enough. Would any of you agree with this?
Okay, I can only speak from personal experience. So as Sandeep sir mentioned, I'm actually one of the kids from Delhi University who ended up in a consulting firm, getting almost 15-16 lakhs per annum as my fresher salary, which definitely is not the norm. It's definitely something that happens once in a blue moon. But I definitely believe that 12 lakhs per annum, even if you live in a city like Gurgaon, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, is an extremely good income for a fresher, because not only can you account for your rent and spendings that you absolutely have to make, but also can, if you try hard enough and if you stop on like a lot of discretionary spending, you can actually save up for an emergency fund and your investments. So I think 12 lakhs per annum as a fresher is a good salary, because as a fresher, especially right out of undergrad, you don't really have a lot of employable skills anyway. So it's good that, so some advice that I would want to give to an absolute fresher is that also just don't go for a brand name, also go for an organization which sort of helps you upskill within that niche, so that 2 years or 3 years down the line, you can actually demand a huge raise when it comes to your salary.
Right, Sanchita, well, if you're looking at 18 lakh being that median, would you say, with 30% that would come in the higher end of that tax bracket, would that be good enough then if you're going to do that kind of math? Or would you try and stay within, lesser than that 15 lakh criteria so that you get into the lower tax bracket?
No, definitely. Tax is an outcome that is not in your hand. Right? As an individual, you'll always try to maximize your earnings. That should be the priority. And also learn. Your learning curve and your learning growth should be your priority. Earnings, salary, tax, these are all outcomes end of the day. Once you mature as an individual, you'll realize that the learning curve is paramount towards financial success. But what I would like to answer is that for all the freshers and all the audience who's watching this, what you need to do is immediately have an Excel sheet. For example, if you get an offer, say in Mumbai and Delhi, it's not apples to apples. It's even vis-a-vis Bangalore, right? Or vis-a-vis Singapore. You need to have an Excel. You need to inculcate your rent, the amount that you put aside, say for your EMI, if you're trying to buy a house, if not, electricity expenses, mobile expenses, what's taken care of by the organization, what is not. What is your CTC in your hand? You should definitely have a health insurance which is beyond your company. Health insurance products, the premiums in India are one of the lowest in the world, right? You need to have your Excel sheet done. If you're married, you need to figure out the school fees, tuition, all of that, neighborhood costs, the monthly amount that you pay to the building for maintenance, all of that. Once your Excel sheet is ready and you know the city that you're living in, only then you'd be able to figure out what is the correct salary for you, what you need to negotiate with your employer, and all of that. And what you need to target in terms of gaining, in terms of work experience. Are there different verticals that you need to work on to increase your work experience? What is it that you need to do?
Right. But I guess we've got quite a rounded perspective there for somebody who's entering the job market. An Excel sheet with all of this is something they need to definitely have handy. Perhaps we didn't do it, but that is something that now, because these have become such common conversations and Twitter is there to, bolster on to tell you that, okay, don't settle for that 20 lakhs per annum. You can probably do much more. But I would like to thank our guests, Sanchita Mukherjee, as well as Sandeep Bidani and Shreya Kapoor. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And hopefully we've at least given some bit of thought for the people who are getting into the market, for them to determine whether what salary they're getting is enough salary. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.